For millions of Americans, retirement is a time of greater freedom, but also greater uncertainty. After decades of work, many people look forward to spending more time with family, pursuing hobbies, traveling, volunteering, or simply enjoying a slower pace of life. Yet retirement also brings important questions. Will my savings last? How will rising healthcare costs affect my budget? And perhaps most importantly, can I continue to rely on Social Security? For many retirees, Social Security is more than a government program. It is an important part of the monthly income that helps pay for housing, groceries, utilities, and medical expenses. In some households, it represents a significant portion of retirement income. That is why headlines about Social Security often attract so much attention. You may have seen warnings that the system is running out of money. You may have heard predictions of benefit cuts. You may even have heard claims that Social Security is going bankrupt. When people depend on something, uncertainty naturally creates concern. So what should retirees actually understand about the future of Social Security? Is the program really in danger of disappearing? And what might the next decade look like for current and future beneficiaries? In today's retirement briefing, we'll examine how Social Security works, why funding challenges exist, what official projections currently indicate, and what retirees should realistically understand as they plan for the years ahead. The goal is not fear. The goal is understanding. To appreciate why Social Security matters so much, it helps to consider just how many Americans depend on it. Today, tens of millions of people receive Social Security benefits. For some retirees, Social Security provides supplemental income. For others, it serves as a primary source of monthly support. These payments help cover everyday expenses: rent or mortgage payments, property taxes, food, utilities, transportation, healthcare costs. In other words, Social Security is woven into the financial lives of millions of American households. That is one reason discussions about its future often generate strong emotions. When people hear phrases such as funding shortfall or trust fund depletion, many immediately wonder whether their retirement security is at risk. Before we answer that question, let's take a step back and understand how the system actually works. The basic concept is simpler than many people realize. Most working Americans pay Social Security taxes through payroll deductions. Employers also contribute. Those funds are used primarily to support current beneficiaries. In simple terms, today's workers help fund today's retirees. This arrangement has existed for generations. As the workforce grew and the economy expanded, the system generally maintained a balance between contributions and benefits. Over time, Social Security also accumulated reserve funds designed to help support the program during periods when benefit payments exceeded incoming payroll tax revenue. Those reserves are often referred to as the Social Security Trust Funds. You do not need to understand every accounting detail to understand the larger picture. The important point is that Social Security has always depended on a combination of payroll tax revenue and long-term planning. And for many decades, that system worked as intended. So why are concerns increasing today? The answer has less to do with politics and more to do with demographics. And that brings us to the next part of the story. Surrounding Social Security can be traced to a simple reality. America is changing. The country today looks very different than it did when Social Security was first established. And the changes creating pressure on the system have been developing for decades. The first factor is demographics. You have probably heard the term baby boomers. This generation, born during the years following World War II, represents one of the largest generations in American history. As millions of baby boomers reach retirement age, the number of Social Security beneficiaries continues to grow. That alone is not necessarily a problem. After all, Social Security was designed to support retirees. The challenge is that the number of retirees is growing faster than the number of workers supporting the system. And that brings us to the second factor. People are living longer. In many ways, this is wonderful news. Advances in medicine, healthcare, and living standards have helped many Americans enjoy longer and healthier lives. But longer lives also mean Social Security benefits are often paid for more years than they were decades ago. A retiree who receives benefits for 20 or 30 years places different demands on the system than someone who receives benefits for a shorter period. Again, this is not a crisis, it is simply a reality that planners must account for. The third factor involves the relationship between workers and retirees. When Social Security was created, there were significantly more workers supporting each beneficiary. Over time, that ratio has gradually declined. Today, fewer workers support each retiree than in previous generations. Imagine a group of people contributing to a shared fund. If more people begin drawing from that fund while fewer people contribute to it, the financial balance eventually changes. That example is not a perfect representation of Social Security, but it helps illustrate the challenge. Taken together, these trends help explain why experts have discussed Social Security's long-term finances for many years. This is not a new problem. It did not appear overnight. And it is not the result of a single event. Rather, it is the outcome of demographic trends that have been developing over a long period of time. Understanding that point is important, because once we understand the cause of the challenge, we can better understand the projections. And this is where many headlines create confusion. You may have heard statements suggesting that Social Security is running out of money. At first glance, that sounds alarming, but the reality is more nuanced. When experts discuss future funding challenges, they are often referring to the reserves held by the Social Security trust funds. According to current projections, those reserves may eventually become depleted if no changes are made to the system. For many people, that immediately raises a frightening question. Does that mean Social Security disappears? The answer is no. And this distinction is perhaps the most important takeaway in today's briefing. A depletion of trust fund reserves is not the same thing as the end of Social Security. Even if those reserves were exhausted, payroll taxes would continue to be collected from workers across the country. Those payroll taxes would continue to provide substantial funding for benefits. In other words, the discussion is generally about funding shortfalls, not complete program elimination. That is a very important difference. Now, that does not mean the challenge should be ignored. Funding shortfalls are serious, they deserve attention, and they may require action. But understanding the actual issue helps us move beyond alarming headlines and toward a more realistic perspective. The question facing policymakers is not whether Social Security matters. Millions of Americans depend on it. The question is how future funding challenges might be addressed. And that brings us to the next part of the story. What options exist, and what should retirees realistically understand as they look ahead? As we look toward the future, an important question remains. If Social Security faces funding challenges, what could happen next? The honest answer is that nobody knows exactly which path policymakers will choose. However, experts generally discuss several possible approaches. One option would be increasing revenue flowing into the system. This could involve adjustments to payroll taxes or other funding mechanisms. Another possibility would be changes to benefit formulas for future beneficiaries. Some proposals focus on adjustments for higher income earners. Others suggest different methods for calculating future benefits. Another frequently discussed option involves retirement age. Because Americans are generally living longer than previous generations, some policymakers have suggested gradually adjusting eligibility ages over time. It is important to understand that these are examples of possible approaches. They are not predictions, and they are certainly not guarantees. The purpose of this briefing is not to advocate for any particular solution. Rather, it is to understand the nature of the discussion itself. Because once we move beyond the headlines, a clearer picture begins to emerge. The debate is not really about whether Social Security is important. That question was answered long ago. For millions of Americans, Social Security remains one of the foundations of retirement security. The real debate is how the program can continue meeting its commitments in the decades ahead. And that is a conversation that will likely continue for many years. So, what should retirees and future retirees take away from all of this? First, understand that concern is reasonable. When a significant portion of your retirement income comes from Social Security, it is natural to pay attention to discussions about its future. Staying informed is not only reasonable, it is responsible. Second, remember that alarming headlines rarely tell the complete story. Complex issues are often reduced to a few dramatic words, but real life is usually more complicated than a headline. When you hear phrases such as running out of money or going bankrupt, it is worth taking a closer look at what those statements actually mean. As we've discussed today, a funding challenge is not the same thing as the disappearance of the program. That distinction matters. Third, recognize that retirement planning has always involved uncertainty. Inflation changes, healthcare costs change, markets change, tax laws change, and government programs evolve over time. While none of us can predict the future with certainty, understanding the forces shaping retirement allows us to make more informed decisions. Finally, remember that Social Security is only one part of the retirement picture. Important though it may be, retirement is about more than monthly benefit checks. It is about maintaining independence, protecting your quality of life, spending time with family and friends, pursuing interests that matter to you, and making the most of the years ahead. For many people, retirement represents the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter that may offer greater freedom, new opportunities, and a different perspective on what truly matters. That is why understanding retirement issues is so important. Not because we can control every outcome, but because knowledge often replaces uncertainty with confidence. As we conclude today's briefing, let's return to the question we asked at the beginning. Can Social Security survive the next decade? Based on current information, the answer is not a simple yes or no. The program faces real long-term funding challenges. Those challenges deserve attention, but they are not the same as the end of Social Security. Millions of Americans depend on the program today, and discussions about its future will continue as policymakers consider ways to address the challenges ahead. For retirees, the most productive response is neither panic nor complacency. It is understanding. The more we understand the realities of retirement, the better prepared we are to navigate whatever comes next. Thank you for joining me for this retirement briefing. If you found this discussion helpful, consider subscribing for future briefings covering Social Security, Medicare, inflation, healthcare costs, retirement planning, and the economic forces shaping retirement in America. Until next time, stay informed, stay curious, and take care.